Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Taylor Maurer, and he is the managing partner of HCRC, and they are an expert in the area of recruiting in the heavy civil construction space. So today we're going to talk all things recruiting, including how to develop an employment value proposition, how to figure out if a potential employee is just kicking tires or if they're serious about joining your organization, why recruiting should be viewed by you as a marketing function, and how that impacts the way you outreach to potential clients. We're going to also talk about the biggest mistake people make when they're hiring, and also how to handle the situation when you bring in a high-level outside executive into a new position, and how to handle the conversations with the peers of that person and also the direct reports of that new person that you have in the company. In addition to that, we take a deep dive into Taylor's passion for long-distance hiking, a passion that I share with him. And I must admit, I am a little bit envious of him, as I mentioned, right out of the gate, because he has hiked a number of different trails that I am looking forward to getting more into a little later in my life. Okay, so thank you again for listening to Construction Genius here today. Enjoy my conversation with Taylor, and let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Taylor, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you, Eric. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy to have you on the show because you were referred to me by Bill Schultz of Schultz Construction, a dear client and friend of mine. And so
I'm Jim of a fella.
He is. He's a great guy. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to work with him, and I'm glad to have you on the show because we share him in common as a client, and we're going to dive into all things recruiting here today. So welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks.
As we kick off here, I've got to say I'm tremendously jealous of you. And the reason why is because you have completed the Triple Crown. And that Triple Crown has nothing to do with baseball. It has nothing to do with horse racing. It has to do with long distance hiking. You have through hiked lengths of the Appalachian, Pacific Crest Trail, and Continental Divide Trail. So I'd just like to kick off by diving into that a little bit. Tell me, what did you learn about yourself through your hiking experiences?
Wow. I think one of the first things I learned is that I really liked the lifestyle of living on the trail. Being completely self-sufficient and stripping down all of the noise from everyday life is incredibly liberating. When your primary concerns are what you're going to eat, where you're going to get water, and where you're going to sleep, and your day pretty much revolves around those three main factors, it allowed me just room to kind of grow, think. I definitely learned how to be adaptable in situations, whether it was wildlife, weather, things come up on the trails, fires, snow, which there's a huge snowpack this year. So you do have to learn to be adaptable in those situations. But I think also you do run into typically, it's certainly a lot more crowded than when I was hiking those trails now. But you run into so few people that you really learn how to just interact and befriend people who are very different from you. I mean, you share a common passion, certainly, of the outdoors, but people come from all different walks of life to the trail.
So it's very interesting. I like what you said at the beginning there is, you're stripping the noise away. And obviously we're surrounded all day, every day. People who listen to the show, they're, surrounded by that noise as you described it. What do you do now in your day-to-day life to tap into some of that silence or some of that rest, so to speak, away from the noise of everyday life?
I would have to say that it still kind of goes back to exercise and getting outside, even if it's much shorter spans of time, whether it's a hike or a short run, a bicycle ride. I feel that brings me to center. I find it's very helpful in me in controlling my stress. It really helps kind of reduce the stress level and bring me back to center and kind of reach that meditation, that Zen that I enjoy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I live right by the American River up here in Sacramento, and I regularly walk on the river. And the Highway 50 is like five minutes from my house, and the river is like 2 minutes from my house. So walking on the river, that the highway and this large city, Sacramento, is right around you, but yet you see the coyotes, the birds, the bunnies, and you're right. You go away without your headphones, without your phone, and you just spend some time walking. And it does bring you to that place of noiselessness, which is tremendously helpful.
Absolutely.
I want to pivot then into the main topic of conversation, and then that's one of the biggest challenges I know every construction company owner who's listening to this show faces, and that is attracting and then hiring the right people. So when it comes to hiring, and you have many years of experience working both in the industry as an employee for a construction company and now as a senior managing partner of HCRC, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that construction company owners and executives make when they're hiring people into their organization?
I think one of the largest mistakes is owners, and this applies to almost every business owner, is creating the time to build the culture of your company and derif- truly make your company a different place to work than your competitors. The heavy civil construction industry is so driven by the hard bid mentality, right?
Mm.
You've got you win the work by being the low bidder. When you're the low bidder, that means your profit margins could be limited based on your bid. So how do you maximize your profit? Well, you don't have a ton of control over your material cost. You don't have a ton of control over your labor cost. So really, where do you make it up? You make it up in value engineering, ideally, but a lot of times it falls on the project management team to really work very hard on making that profitable. So I feel like in construction, it's kind of it's almost the thought that the dog's always chasing its tail there, and it's
Mm.
hard to break that cycle of chasing that profit to actually create a culture and be able to explain that culture consistently throughout the company, throughout the executives of the company, to potential employees, your employee brand, um, so that you can attract them into your company.
What do you mean by culture?
Again, I think it's what differentiates your company or the company you work at from your competitors. What does that look like? And how does that affect the employees? And what are the stories from the employees, the people that work there, that amplify what your culture is, what your employer brand is?
Now, when you say building the culture, doesn't culture just exist in an organization? How does one actually build a culture?
Sure. Culture, it definitely exists in every organization, whether it's a good culture or a bad culture or somewhere in the middle of the road. Um, it's really up to the executive team to sit down and decide what they want the culture to be like, and then plan on trying to implement things to create what they want their company to be, or how they want their company, the culture to be viewed from the outside, because that's sometimes what the company culture is and what it's viewed like from the outside are two different things.
Tell me more about that then. Why do you say that, what it is and what it's viewed like? Is that because sometimes companies say this is our culture when in fact it's not?
Well, no, I think that a culture changes, right? So sometimes a dark cloud looms over maybe a time of a company when they weren't focused on the culture, or their attention to developing and nurturing the culture of the company was focused somewhere else. Um, I think that happened to a lot of companies back in the Great Recession of
Mm-hmm.
2008, that era. Um, and then if you're not, obviously there's going to be some sharing of your company culture through your employees and the outreach, and then that's interacting with your vendors, your subcontractors, or if you are a subcontractor, interacting with the prime contractor. So you're sharing your culture through those interactions. But how do you actually take that to the market when you're trying to hire? How do you let your your target candidate audience know about your culture? And again, I feel like one of the biggest things is being able to, and it does take training, but you have to define it, and you have to basically repetitively drive the message to your executive team so that the message is consistent. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you want consistency on how you talk about your culture and your company. And I don't think that is often practiced in the industry. Again, mostly driven because of time constraints and focusing on putting out fires.
So, in your experience working with companies, what are some of the most effective ways to actually define your culture?
I think having the plan of what you want your culture to be and implementing it, and then also collecting the stories of how your culture affects the lives of the employees that work there, the people that work there. Being able to share those stories, especially in regards to candidate outreach. Um, just as humans, we're drawn towards stories,
Yeah.
and if if you can't if you struggle to tell your story, to tell a story, um, where and that's a good part of why job descriptions fail so horribly, because they're not telling a story to attract the talent. um, then then I think that it's just that's the challenge, is not collecting and amplifying those stories and how the mission and values of the company uh, really affect the employees and their stories.
Can you give me an example? You don't have to name the company, but an example that you have of an effective job description that incorporates that idea of story.
Wow. You typically in our industry, in the heavy civil construction market, you typically just don't see it. You
No, you
just don't
don't. That's I
you just
know.
don't see it.
Yeah.
So to say that there's a company that is very good at it is, I mean, I have seen, usually it's the medium-sized companies, or even sometimes the larger companies that they have the bandwidth and the people to focus on creating that content for marketing, for talent marketing.
Yep.
And so you'll see stories of the company, like this is how long we've been in business. This is some about our history, and now all of that is part of the story. But they, I can't say that I've seen an example of where they're in a job description that they've shared the stories of the employees in the job description. And a lot of that may be by design in regards to a job description, because job descriptions, if they're too long, if you put anything in front of somebody who's working 50 plus hours a week
Right.
and has a family and a long commute, there's a short attention span there. And being able to tell that story in a job description is very difficult. I feel like it's almost better if you're actively marketing to your candidate base your story, and sometimes we see that done very effectively through video
Okay.
and video marketing, but it's not actually done in a job description typically.
Okay. So when you say marketing to your candidate base,
Yes, sir.
I don't think that most people consider hiring as from the perspective of marketing. And I'm interested and curious to you to just describe to the audience a little bit about what you mean by marketing to your candidate base when it comes to hiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a recruiting firm, I started off in recruiting as cold calling, and cold calling candidates, and are you motivated? What's your motivation? Here's an opportunity that may be different or may be able to help you fix your problem.
Mm-hmm.
But as we developed, and after I founded HCRC, Heavy Civil Resource Consultants, I've come to understand very quickly that you've got to be as much of a marketing company as you are a recruiting company.
Right.
One of the main reasons for that is the unemployment rate in construction is typically very low.
Yes.
Even in times of recessions, typically the federal government is putting money into infrastructure to negate the effects of the recession
Yes.
overall. So consistently, we see low unemployment rates. So companies are hiring passive candidates typically. These candidates are employed, and very rarely do you find strong talent sitting on the bench. And if they are on the bench, they're on the bench for such a short period of time. Making sure that your message is getting in front of them at the right time is very difficult. So, you really have to market your company to a potential candidate base, and ideally, you need to do it consistently, so that even though the candidate may not even work for a competitor of your company when you're trying to hire, but ideally they're going to know who you are because you've been marketing to them. And I think that yes.
Yeah, let me
Go ahead.
just ask you a little bit here. I know that what you just said is very true. That there's the talent that's out there is very much difficult to find because the unemployment rates are so low.
Yes.
In your experience, what are some of the main reasons that strong candidates switch from one company to another?
Wow. The reasons for a switch can be, I mean, they usually fall into two categories, certainly professional or personal.
Right.
And so with professional, I would say the two main reasons are limited growth, toxic culture. Those are the two main reasons that we see people making a move professionally. Personally, it can vary. I mean, I want to get back closer to where I grew up. We're having kids. We want to be close to my in-laws. It could just vary really across the board. I'm tired of living in Minnesota. I want to live in Texas or Florida where it's warm.
Yeah.
So those factors are are much more expansive. But the two main reasons professionally are either toxic culture, lack of growth, um, or perhaps the business plan of the company doesn't really align with the where the candidate thinks the company should be going.
It's very interesting because I know that when it comes to this idea of marketing, I want to tie in this idea of limited growth and toxic culture to the idea of marketing to your target audience. Um, and obviously, the best marketing is the marketing that solves the problem, clearly articulates how my company then solves the problem of my target audience. And so, what that tells me then is that one of the ways for a construction company to be effective in recruiting is to understand their target audience in terms of which companies do have limited growth and or toxic culture environments. So what are some of the most effective ways that a construction company can identify either their competition, direct competition, or perhaps geographic competition that comes outside of their geography, similar companies, in other words? What are
Sure.
some of the best ways to identify those companies where there may be some limited growth for good for some of the high performers and also that toxic culture?
That's not a problem that is easily solved. And our approach to that is you have to do it at a very high volume.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to talk about a particular company. I'm going to leave them nameless, but they
Please
are,
do. Yep.
but they are one of the biggest civil contractors in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And whether they have a good culture or a bad culture is very arguable. And I think that it actually changes based on where you're at in your career. And they have a very high attrition rate for the entry level, say 2 to 10 year candidates. They have a much lower attrition rate for the 10 to 40 year or till retirement. And so um, we know that because we're talking to those candidates. We interact with those candidates.
Mm-hmm.
We're hearing their stories. We're getting their stories. Now, for a company not to utilize the services of a recruiter like us, then it's really hard to get that information, to invest the time in going out and recruiting for that. Most companies do some in-house recruiting. Sometimes it's a shared role with human resources. For larger, medium-sized, larger companies, they may have dedicated recruiters as
Right.
well. And I'm happy to talk about the issues that we typically see with in-house recruiting. But that's really the only way that you got to pound the pavement to get the word on the street of what other companies are doing. The other way to get around it is you just market it. You market your employer brand and or employment value propositions. It's such a high volume that you're going to cover the population that will be dealing with those situations of toxic culture or no room for growth.
I think one of the things to think about, I'd like to suggest is that as you're interacting with folks in your industry as a construction company owner, think about those companies that are family owned and that are going to be passing on to the next generation at some point. And think about those companies which perhaps you have a son or a daughter coming into the company and they're destined for the top seat in the organization one way or another. And yet there's that other person who's a non-family member.
Mm-hmm.
And that person is perhaps the COO or a VP of some kind, and they know that they'll never get that top spot. And perhaps you can bring them over into your organization and give them an expanded level of responsibility and challenge that they're not going to get in the company because the son or the daughter or sons and daughters are going to be taking over that business from their parents. And you may want to think of that as a particular targeting framework when you're looking at companies that could provide strong candidates who are limited because of the growth opportunities. What do you think of that perspective, Taylor?
Yeah. There's a few thoughts I have on this. One is obviously you're talking about a succession plan here in regards to kids coming up in a company and taking over. And so in regards to that succession planning, I feel like it needs to be done early. And I personally have left a company because I didn't feel like there was enough transparency. So after the succession plan is decided on, or maybe even bringing in those top executives that may be potentially ousted into the succession planning process, could be key in retaining them as employees and continuing to contribute to the growth and the success of the company. I mean, I can put myself in somebody else's shoes and say, what would I do? And what I would do is I would absolutely have that key employee be very involved in mentoring my son, daughter in regards to coming up into the company. I also find that so many people, especially when they've dedicated many years of their life, countless hours a week of their life to the success and growth of a company, what do they want? They want ownership. Does it have to be 50% of the company? No. But if you do have the tolerance to put their skin in the game, I think it makes it a lot more attractive and much easier to retain that type of talent, given that very common situation that you mentioned, Eric.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I think a couple of things to do is that if you have that situation in your company where you're thinking of bringing in your kids into the business, and assuming they're qualified, obviously, then you should be thinking about that top talent that you have and how you might retain them through ownership. But at the same time, if you're doing your marketing for talent for your own business, have an awareness of those companies whose succession plan doesn't involve that top talent, because that top talent then may be interested in a move, not necessarily because of a cultural fit, but just because of an opportunity fit in terms of perhaps ownership, as you just articulated, or expanded responsibility.
Yes, expanded responsibility, more responsibility is the other option. Or a mixture of both expanded responsibility and ownership, ideally, to retain that talent.
You use the phrase employment value proposition. What is
Yes,
that,
sir.
and how does someone create that employment value proposition?
It is a little bit tricky because you can't make a proposal to someone without having at least a decent understanding of where they're at currently, what their motivating factors are. But you can still use your culture, potentially your benefits, to start creating an employment value proposition right out of the gate. We see benefits pretty much across the board, from companies that cover 100% premiums, cover almost all of the deductibles for their employees, versus companies that have pretty high premiums. Now, it's very true. I mean, health cost is going through the roof. And how do companies deal with that and try to make their plans attractive? But if we are taking a certain position to market for a client and their benefits are exceptionally good, that is one piece of the pie of this potentially employment value proposition.
Is that just like a phrase? is that a phrase that you have, or is it like a one page that describes your employment value proposition? How do you create that? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, an employment value proposition is anything that you can think of that is going to attract somebody to come to work for you and retain them as an employee as well. Again, I mentioned benefits. If you have exceptional retirement, that is something to note. If your bonuses are above industry standard, that is something to note. But you also want to get into the culture. We saw COVID start to change the face of construction in regards to creating more hybrid and remote roles. For the most part, most of those hybrid and remote options are gone for employees. They didn't stay. But we saw how many employees say, gosh, I really wish I could have a hybrid position. Gosh, I really wish I could have a remote position. Now, granted, many positions in construction you just can't do remotely. I mean, I'm not saying that every position should be remote or every position should be hybrid. However, I think that I thought that there was a silver lining in the cloud of COVID here that was going to change the industry and make it a lot more open than it actually ended up being when it came to
open
to hybrid and remote work. Yes, for certain positions.
So you're opening, and okay, for certain positions, you're opening up kind of a can of worms here, Taylor, because it was funny. I was with one of my clients, and they're a $1 billion plus GC recently, and they were doing a company meeting, and one of the owners of the company, one of the partners, made a comment about the end of the remote / hybrid work environment, people coming back into the office, and I just recall the CFO going like this. He was clapping. Because I think there's a real backlash against that hybrid remote work environment, simply because most people aren't that effective in that environment. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the effectiveness of an employee, a particular employee, falls part of that responsibility falls on the employee directly, and then part of it falls on the management of that employee. So, do I believe there have been studies that have been done that state, and I don't know how the studies were done or measured, but they do state that people that work from home are not less. They don't produce less than what they would if they are in an office. You also have to take into consideration, Eric, that an employee might have an hour commute to the office and an hour and a half commute or longer back to their house. You eliminate that, and that can allow more time for that particular employee to actually do work instead of drive. Now, maybe they can knock out some telephone calls while they're on the way to work or while they're on the way home, but it does limit the time that you have to actually work. So I don't think that there's any golden rule that says, yes, for this individual, remote's the way to go, or it's not. It's going to depend a good bit on the individual, the employee, and the manager. Right? To make sure that you're keeping the employee on task. Are there people that will take advantage of it and be less productive? There certainly are out there, absolutely. And how do you get around that by having two people that are in similar roles and one's allowed to work a hybrid schedule and the other one's not? That's a good question. I'm not sure that there's an easy way to answer that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you hit upon something that is pretty unique in that. So this is my non-scientific take. 20% of your people can absolutely work remotely and be highly efficient. 80% of your people are going to really struggle with it because they need other people around them in order to perform at a high level. And it's not because they're bad people or they're irresponsible. It's either because of their nature or just the fact that some people, like the same reason why everyone doesn't start their own business, right? One of the reasons why everyone doesn't start their own business is because they just don't have what it takes in their makeup to take complete responsibility for themselves and drive through the challenges of holding yourself accountable, which is required when you start your own business. And it's not because they're bad people or they have low character, it just is who they are as people. And I think another aspect of it that really in construction, particularly that I've seen, is that let's say I'm a project engineer and I'm working remotely and I can do the technical part of my job. I can do the scheduling, or I can call the superintendent, or I can do all of that. But I miss out on those conversations that the PM is having with the owner or with the superintendent, where I'm not even involved in the conversation. I'm just observing her have the conversation with the owner, seeing how she interacts with them. And I'm learning so much just by osmosis. Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying the interview today with Taylor. I know I am, getting lots of key takeaways for helping to hire executives into an organization. Once you've hired them, what do you need to do? You need to get them up-leveled in terms of their sales, leadership, strategic thinking, all of those great and important aspects of being a contributing member in your organization. And that's where my book, Construction Genius, comes in. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. And this is what you do. You purchase this book. It costs $20 for the paperback. You get a copy for yourself and all of the leaders in your organization. You read the book over, let's say, a 3-month period. There's 12 chapters, so you take 4 chapters a month. They're easy to read. They're right to the point, so it won't waste your time. And every month you get together and you discuss it. And if you purchase 10 or more copies of Construction Genius and you send me an email, I'll actually come to one of those meetings via Zoom, and I will conduct a question and answer sessions with the people who have read the book. And I'll also give you a bonus training that I would normally charge $2,000 for. And I'll do that at no charge if you purchase 10 or more copies of the book and distribute them throughout your organization. That's what you call a killer deal. So go out to Amazon, get 10 copies of this book today, get your leaders reading it. It will transform the way they think about leadership, and it will enable you to build projects profitably and grow a killer business. All right, let's get back to the interview with Taylor.
Yes, Eric, I 100% agree with you. We are a Heavy Civil Resource Consultants is a recruitment firm,
Yeah.
right? And how did I cut my teeth in this business? It was by sitting in an open room with other recruiters and learning from them through osmosis. If I could only hear one side of the conversation, right? The other person's on the other side of the telephone. This is when you were still picking up the telephone to make a telephone call. But that's how I learned the business. And there is so much to be said about learning certain things that way. And that's why in our business, my colleague Cam is here. He's in the office. My colleague Drew's in the office, and they are learning to do that. Now, my other colleague who does operations and doesn't do phone time, he's a hybrid worker. He works from home 2 days a week. So at least that aspect is not required for him. And when Cam and Drew, when they get good at what they do, they are welcome to work a hybrid schedule as well. I 100% support that. They're with just a few stipulations. So I think that it does. hiring an employee doesn't mean that they have to be remote immediately, but if they can prove themselves, prove their effectiveness, and that is going to help retain that employee, I think it behooves an owner to consider that option in the future.
Yeah. Let me ask you this then, because you touched on this a little bit with the value proposition in terms of bonuses, benefits, things like that. I know sometimes when a company is recruiting a good candidate, they're a good cultural fit, but somehow the package that they put together is different than, let's say, a heavy hitter comes in and says, we've got X, Y, and Z for you, and how then do I position a negotiation when I'm competing with a company that's offering more money or the package is richer?
I think a lot of it has to come down to transparency. So we consult our clients to deliver offers at least over the telephone, if not in person. And when delivering those offers, having a conversation with a candidate about which limitations exist. Most of the time, it's going to be a base salary, right? Hey, look, I'm sorry, but if you already know that they're going to get a higher offer, then and your offer is going to come in low, and you can tell them why. We're not trying to be cheap with you here, but this is the reason that we've come to this number. And I don't think an effective way is by saying that's what we think you're worth. I think having another limitation, as in your boss or another person who's been in that same role for 5 years here is making this much, so we can't quite get you there. But being open to looking outside of the box, whether it's an extra week of vacation, maybe to make it more attractive for a candidate.
Right.
Being honest with them. Hey, I realize we may not be, maybe you're competing with their current employer, right? Who has either made a counteroffer, or, which I don't really recommend companies compete with a candidate who's entertaining a counteroffer. Because the candidate,
why is that? When you say a counteroffer, you mean a counteroffer from their current employer?
From their current employer, yes, sir.
Tell me why. Yeah, say why. Why?
I don't recommend that because if a candidate's only driven by money, then you should step forward with your best. You should put your best foot forward if they're the right candidate for the role and they are a fit into your culture. You should just go ahead and do it. And you should already hit that cap, right? If you're not, then what is your motivation for doing it? Do you feel like they're, again, going back to are they just not worth it? Why aren't you putting your best foot forward? So if you're already putting your best foot forward, there shouldn't really be much room for negotiation. And if a candidate is considering a counteroffer from their current employer, then it really comes down to their motivation. And Eric, what's really important is that you understand a candidate's motivation outside of compensation. There's more to life than money. And what does that candidate really want? Are you going to give them more runway for a career path? Are you going to help them reach their career goals in a shorter time frame? That's a huge selling point. Going back to the culture, and as I mentioned just earlier, is there maybe a possibility of hybrid or something that's just not you're able to give the candidate something that besides money that is attractive to them.
How do you uncover those hidden motivations that you just alluded to?
Yeah, investigative recruiting, right? You have to really dig in and get to know the candidate. When we recruit, we are recruiting and I want to know as much as possible, from their hobbies, what they do in their spare time, to where they're, if they have kids and married, where are their in-laws, where did they grow up, what are their values, what's important to them, what are they struggling with at their current employment, that's the biggest probably key to uncovering how you might be able to put together an employment value proposition that is going to be effective for candidates is understanding why are they having the conversation with you right now about employment? What's driving them to this point? Are they walking around just kicking tires? Are they showing up at the used car lot with knowing that they don't have any money in the bank to buy a new car, but they just like to look at new and shiny things? Maybe candidates
What's the
do that.
best question that you can ask to quickly figure out whether or not the candidate's kicking tires or they're just going to use you as leverage to go get a counter offer from their current employer?
I think asking them in regards to making a career move, what are the top three things they would like to get out of making a career move? Because money is generally a factor that's going to come into play. But at least you're figuring out two other motivating factors. And I would say dig into it more. But if you put a list of 10 things, a candidate may not be able to come up with it, right? And they may start scrambling and just making things up. So I think starting off with asking them, what are three top things that you're looking to gain out of making a career move? We also, we specifically.
So hold on.
Yes, sir.
Let me just ask you that. So let's say you ask him that top three. If they're tire kickers and they're going to use you as leverage, are they going to go money and then kind of struggle after that?
If they're, and I think, it may be a little bit more difficult for a company to ask this question, but we are broaching the counteroffer conversation very early on in getting to know a candidate.
How do you broach
and
that?
we role play it with them. What is it going to look like going in to your boss and turning in your resignation? And before I ask that question, I want to know how they would describe their relationship with their boss. Are they going fishing on weekends? They go grab a couple beers at after work. Do they come over for family barbecues? They go to church together. What does that relationship look like?
Right.
And that can also give you a very strong indication for how motivated or the individual might be, or what type of counteroffer risk they may pose. Now, I will go as far to say this, Eric. Is it bad to interview a candidate that poses a counteroffer risk? Not necessarily. You just have to understand that you may lose that candidate to a counteroffer. But if you have the bandwidth and the time, and they are the A player that you need and you want for your company, does it mean that you shouldn't make a run for it? Not necessarily. But you just have to understand. That's why we, when we're submitting candidates to our clients, we go ahead and tell if they're a high counteroffer risk, we go ahead and let them know right out of the gate, and we leave it up to them to make the decision: is this a candidate you want to interview, knowing this or not?
Okay, a couple more questions for you, and I know this is a practical one from a client of mine just recently. You bring in a high-level executive from the outside to take a role in the organization. How do I prepare long-term employees when I hire that person? And let me just ask it this way. Number one, I'm going to have employees reporting to this person. And then perhaps my company is growing, and so I have a key employee, and I'm taking away responsibility from him or her in an appropriate way and giving it to someone else. Mm-hmm. So how do I prepare both the peer of the high-ranking executive I'm bringing in and the direct reports of that high-ranking executive that I'm bringing in from the outside?
I would say transparency, honesty, and compassion are the three words that come to mind when having that conversation. If you're going to take something away from someone, it's always good to try to give them something else in return. pre- certainly preparing them for this before it's done may be important. It may be even important for them to be part of the interview process. If they're going to be reporting to this new executive, it's better that they like each other and that they get to know each other before the individual just shows up to work and they get off on a bad foot, right? So preparing, being transparent, starting early in the process, because really what it comes down to, Eric, is this is part of succession planning,
Yes.
right? This is succession planning.
Yep.
And as I mentioned before, being transparent in that succession planning and trying to bring as much of your organization into the plan as possible. And having a voice. It's always good to feel like you have a voice. Even if you don't get what you want, if you're not getting what you want, if a safe place is created where you can share your concerns and share your voice, that goes and be understood. Have somebody active listen, say, I hear you and I understand. I might feel the same way if I were in your shoes. What can we do about this? And having the conversation like that, I think, is the best way to prepare to successfully navigate that type of situation.
Excellent. So then I brought a person on board, and many of us we struggle when we've made an investment in someone or something and that investment is not working out. We struggle to cut our costs or cut our losses rather and move on. So what do I do when I've made a hiring mistake? How do I handle that?
Yeah, I think before you take any action, you need to assess the situation from all angles. Many times it may be very reactive just to be like, I got to let the person go. I've got to let the person go. I got to let them go today, tomorrow, this week. It's got to happen. Maybe before you have that, you think about how that's going to affect the other employees around that person. What is that person doing effectively that's going to have to be picked up by someone else to keep the project or to keep the revenue or the schedule on point,
Mm-hmm.
right? So often what we see is people getting burned out. Somebody leaves the company is not doing enough to hire, not investing enough time or money to hire a new employee that will be able to carry the load, and so that load gets distributed amongst the current employees, and eventually that carrying too much of the load for too long is going to burn those employees out. So you have the potential of losing great employees who've been there for a long time if you don't address the situation appropriately. I would say that if you find if the person's a cultural fit into the company and you can see them contributing in a different way, then redeploy. If they can't contribute to the company, to the growth, profit, culture of the company, then you likely need to let them go. And you can do that respectfully as well. You can fire somebody or let somebody go respectfully and say, hey, look, I'm happy to be a reference for you. You maybe even say, you know what, I don't think that things are really working out here, but I've got a friend of mine who has this company, and maybe you should go talk to this individual. This is what you do really well. And I think that type of skill is something you need to focus on in your career and moving forward. And I'd like to be a sounding board for anybody else that you might be considering as a potential employer to share my thoughts and feedback with them regarding that.
That's excellent.
So I think that there is that. But I would say if the candidate's cultural fit and they can contribute to the company, redeploy in a different position or different responsibilities. But if they're not, then you need to plan on how you're going to transition that person out and how their responsibilities are going to be distributed upon your current employees and what refilling that position might look like.
Okay, excellent. So Taylor, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company and what you do for construction organizations.
Sure. So I founded Heavy Civil Resource Consultants in 2017. We are an executive search company for the construction, heavy civil construction, and I would say related industries. Like we get into aggregates and do some industrial, like Bill. We do water treatment, which obviously has civil work in it, but also many other types of mechanical and other types of works in those. So we help our clients fulfill the three crucial things to hiring and to successfully delivering talent. And the three crucial pillars are: you must have a pool of candidates to communicate with, to reach out to. The biggest failure point, Eric, in almost every search is a message that fails to convert passive candidates to engage in the process. Mm-hmm. Now, we are here to consult with that and also help in creating and generating marketing material. What we can't do is create a culture for a company with, we just can't do it. It takes too much time. They need to hire somebody. Really, we can coach them on how to change the culture, but we can't do it for them.
Okay.
The third is you've got to be able to communicate at high volumes with that potential pool of candidates, and you need to do it consistently. And I think what we consistently see, for the feedback we get from candidates consistently, is when they are interviewing or when they submit their resume to a company, they have a poor experience. Many times they'll submit their resume. They don't know who's going to see that resume. They don't know where it's going to land. It may not even see the light of day. It may fall into a junk mail folder that doesn't get checked. Or it may be reviewed by a human resource professional who doesn't quite understand what the exact hiring needs of the company are, or the future business plan of the company, and how they might develop employees for that. And they never get feedback, right? These candidates never get feedback. It's not a sorry, no needs right now, nothing. It's just nothing. It's crickets. They hear crickets. So really trying to improve that candidate experience, even for candidates that aren't a fit at that time. So we see that happen quite consistently through internal recruiting or internal direct submissions of resumes.
Excellent.
But it is very hard to successfully do those three crucial pillars. I mean, we communicate with candidates through multi-channels, texting, email, also through social media.
Yep.
At a volume that is quite high. I think on average we have about 10,000 emails going out a day, and to manage that is quite an operation. And we're not just doing direct solicitation. Ideally, any company that is collecting potential candidates, whether they want to hire them then, potentially later, you want to stay in touch with those candidates. If they're not a fit, if they're not engaging in the process, the interview process immediately, you want to reach out and touch them every month. Maybe even invite them to some type of company activity. If the timing's off, but they're a really good candidate that you might utilize later, start bringing them into the company culture, and that's where amplifying that employer brand and employment value proposition to these potential candidates is very important, even if it's for finding a position for them later.
And how can folks get in touch with you?
wow, you can call me. That's one of the best ways to do it. Yeah, you can go to our website, hcrc.us. Um, and yeah, we'd love to consult with you and tell you a little bit about how we work and what our expectations of our clients are, and understand the expectations that you might have of us as a talent delivery partner, and see if we can help you in regards to marketing to your talent base.
That's excellent. And we'll put the links in the show notes to your website so they can get in touch with you. A last question here, going back to the beginning of our conversation. If I had to choose between the PCT, the Appalachian Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail, which one am I going to choose first?
Oh my goodness. Oh, choose first. Wow. Okay. Choose first.
Or, okay, no, I'll make it more difficult. If I only had to pick one, which one would I pick?
Oh gosh. I was going to say I can work with choosing first, Eric, but I don't know about choosing one. That would be like me trying to choose which one I would do again, right?
Right. It's like if you have 3 kids, you got to say which one's my favorite, right?
Yeah, exactly. They are certainly all different, and certainly they're different today than when I hiked them, because let's see, the Appalachian Trail was in '99, Pacific Crest Trail in 2002, the Continental Divide Trail in 2011, and yeah, I actually hiked the length of New Zealand. They have a long distance trail in New Zealand as well in 2015-16. Which one would I do? Well, which one would I suggest you do? They all have their own unique challenges.
Yeah.
It's none's easier than the other, I would say.
Right.
The Pacific Crest Trail it's a pack animal trail. So typically the grades are easier. So physically starting off, getting out there and getting in shape on the trail, if you're not trail shape already, is going to be easier on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Right.
Most people travel south to north, and your biggest challenge there is water. You do have to make pretty big miles to get water, and even with the amount of snow, there's still very limited water down in the desert section of the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah, it's true.
Appalachian Trail, you don't have any problem with water, and they are continuing to make it a little less steep every year. It gets a little bit longer and a little less steep. But I grew up near the Southern Appalachians, and I truly feel like that's where my heart is. So I love that trail. I have this passion, this connection to it. Then you go look at the Rockies, and the Rockies will blow you away. Being up in Glacier National Park, hiking through Yosemite, it's just amazing. But the year that we hiked, the trail was not completely established. There was a crew out there mapping the official route of the trail the year that we were out there. And we were using this gentleman's maps called Brian Lay. And I don't even know if he makes maps for the trail anymore. So, gosh, they are all so different. What would I do again? Maybe the Appalachian Trail, just because my heart's there. And I've been out west for 7 years now. So, being able to get back to the East Coast and the lush green forest and to see the seasons would be amazing. To see that again, just because I've been away for so long. But they are all absolutely beautiful, all challenging in different ways.
That's excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Taylor. Lots of tremendous insights that we can take away from the biggest mistake that people make, using recruiting as a marketing function, why people switch businesses, how to identify those tire kickers, how to develop your employee value proposition. Tremendous value here, Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us today on Construction Genius.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Eric. And it's been a pleasure. We love podcasting. We actually have done some podcasts ourselves, and we'd love to share your podcast with our population as well. So yeah, I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you very much. Hey, this is Eric. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Taylor. Make sure you check out his website, hcrc.us. Contact him if you'd like to get to know a little bit more about the work that he does, helping heavy civil companies to recruit candidates. And thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. Remember, hire slow, fire fast, and make sure there's a cultural fit. Give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us to get the show seen across the internet. And I look forward to catching you on the next episode.